The mosque was cool and quiet in the afternoon heat. Sunlight filtered through the windows, laying soft golden stripes across the prayer rugs. Inside, Sheikh Hamid sat cross-legged, his lips moving silently as his did his zikr. The peaceful rhythm of zikr was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps. The mosque door swung open and a young boy, no more than 12, stumbled inside, panting, his eyes wide with panic. Sheikh Hamid, the boy gasped, clutching his chest. Hamid looked up, frowning at the fear in the boy's voice. "What is it, son?" The boy hesitated, his small frame trembling. It's Ahmad. There was a fight, he couldn't finish. The words stuck in his throat. Hamid rose quickly. "Where?" The boy turned and ran, and Hamid followed, his heart pounding in his chest. His legs carried him faster than they had in years, the streets blurring as he rushed past. Neighbors called after him, but he didn't stop. Then, ahead, he saw the crowd. A tight circle of people in the middle of the street. Whispers and gasps filled the air, broken by the low, urgent voices of men trying to calm the scene. Hamid pushed through, his hands trembling. And then, he saw him. Ahmad lay on the ground, his head resting in the lap of an elderly man who was pressing a cloth against the side of his face. The cloth was soaked in red. Hamid fell to his knees beside his son. Ahmad, my boy, open your eyes." But Ahmad's eyes fluttered only briefly. His lips moved, but the words were too soft to hear. Hamid leaned closer, catching just one faint whisper, "There is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger." Then his head grew heavy, his body still. Hamid's voice cracked as he called his son's name again and again, but no answer came. Around them, the crowd fell silent. The only sound was the flutter of pages from Ahmad's Quran lying nearby, its cover speckled with dust. The world seemed to tilt, the edges of Hamid's vision blurring. He pressed his forehead to his son's and whispered, over and over, "From Allah we came, and to him we shall return. From Allah we came, and to him we shall return." In that moment, the old man felt a pain deeper than any wound of the flesh, the kind of pain that settles into the bones and never truly leaves. The call to Maghrib had just faded when the earth was opened. A simple grave, dug deep in the soft soil at the edge of the small village cemetery. The scent of freshly turned earth mixed with the faint smell of the incense burning nearby. Men gathered silently, their faces drawn, their eyes lowered. The Quran was being recited in a low, trembling tone, "Every soul shall taste death." Sheikh Hamid stood at the head of the grave, his hands clasped so tightly they trembled. His eyes were red, not from tears alone, but from the long night and day of grief. Ahmad's body lay before him, wrapped in a pure white shroud, face calm as if in peaceful sleep. A young man stepped forward and whispered, "It's time, Sheikh." Hamid nodded slowly. Together, with the help of two others, they lowered Ahmad gently into the grave. The cloth rustled softly against the wooden boards beneath. Hamid's lips trembled as he recited, "In the name of Allah, and upon the way of the messenger of Allah." The moment his son's body touched the earth, Hamid felt the reality strike like a storm. This was no dream, no passing shadow. His boy was gone from this world. The men began to fill the grave. One handful of dirt, then another. Each thud of earth landing on the shroud felt like a hammer against Hamid's chest. He wanted to scream, to pull the soil away, to see Ahmad's face one last time, but he stood still, his eyes fixed on the ground. Finally, the mound was shaped, smooth and modest. As everyone in attendance faced the Qibla to pray for Ahmad, Hamid did same, after which he knelt by the grave, his hands resting on the soil. "Ya Allah, forgive my son. Make his grave spacious. Fill it with light. Protect him from the trial of the grave, and make it a garden from the gardens of Jannah." His voice broke halfway through the dua. The men placed gentle hands on his shoulders, urging him to rise. As they left, the cemetery grew quiet again. The only sound was the wind, weaving through the stones, carrying with it the whispers of the Quran. Hamid walked away slowly, each step heavy, feeling as though part of his soul had been left behind under the earth. The morning sun cast long shadows on the courthouse steps. Sheikh Hamid stood at the entrance, his white thob perfectly pressed, his lips wet with zikr. Yet his hands were cold. It was not the weather, it was the weight of what was about to unfold. Inside, the air was heavy. Wooden benches lined the hall. The faint sound of pages turning could be heard as the court clerk arranged documents. Security guards stood motionless by the doors. Every movement, every cough, echoed unnaturally loud in the stillness. Hamid took a seat in the second row, directly behind the prosecution's table. His gaze remained low until the bailiff's voice cut through the silence, "Bring in the accused." A door creaked open. And there he was, Kareem. The man who had been the source of so much pain in Hamid's life for the last months. His hands were cuffed, his eyes darting quickly across the room before settling, uncomfortably, on Hamid. It was only for a moment, but that glance carried years of untold stories, shame, and defiance all at once. Hamid felt his chest tighten. Whispered under his breath, "Allah is sufficient for me. None has the right to be worshipped but Him. Upon Him I rely." The judge entered. Everyone stood. The trial began. The prosecutor rose first, reading out the charges in a voice that carried no emotion, only the cold weight of law. Every word felt like another nail in the coffin of a life already gone. When it was Kareem's turn to speak, his voice was low, almost hesitant. I didn't mean for it to happen that way," he began, eyes fixed on the floor. "It wasn't supposed to." He trailed off, as though the truth was too heavy for his tongue. Hamid leaned forward slightly. His heart pounded. He wanted to hear every word, but he also feared what he might hear. The defense lawyer began crafting excuses, trying to chip away at the weight of the accusation. But Hamid wasn't listening anymore. His mind had drifted, to Ahmad's laughter, to the smell of his clothes, to the night he was buried. Then he felt it, a strange mix of anger and mercy bubbling in his chest. Was this man in front of him just a criminal, or another soul lost, in need of guidance? The session ended abruptly. The judge announced the next hearing date. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through Hamid's bones. As Kareem was led away, his eyes flicked toward Hamid again. This time, Hamid didn't look away.
The courthouse held its own kind of stillness, not empty, but tense, like a room holding its breath. Light fell through tall windows and cut across benches of polished wood. The air smelled faintly of dust and paper, and every small sound, the rustle of a robe, a throat cleared, the stamp of a leather shoe, carried farther than it should. Sheikh Hamid walked in with the cautious steps of a man who had already learned that the world could surprise him in cruelty. He took the seat he'd chosen without thinking about it, second row, close enough to the aisle to stand if needed, far enough from the accused so that the town's eyes could not pin him to a single expression. When the bailiff called the case, the doorway opened and Kareem was brought forward. Shackled at the wrists, hair unkempt, eyes heavy with sleeplessness, he looked smaller than the man who had once lurked around the market stalls. In the sudden hush of the courtroom, Kareem's breath sounded loud. He did not meet anyone's eyes for long. When he glanced toward Hamid, it was the quick, guilty look of a man who recognizes that nothing he does from this moment on can undo what has been done. The prosecutor spoke in steady, precise sentences, laying out the events as the town had learned to tell them, the argument, the shove, the sudden strike, the collapse. Witnesses rose one by one, the merchant who had been across the street and could still see Ahmed's hands on the counter, a woman who'd run from her doorway to find a young man on the ground, a child whose memory held a single, frightened shout. Each voice filled in the shape of that afternoon, not to sensationalize but to pin the incident to a human sequence. A man asked, a man refused, a grievance turned into violence. Around Hamid the crowd shifted. Some faces were open with grief and anger. Others were masked by that curious thing a town learns, fascination with drama. Old men muttered the legal terms as if saying them could soothe the wound. Qisas, what is due in blood, diya, compensation. A few women sat with hands folded tight, their eyes hollowed by too many funerals. And yet, threaded through the murmurs, there were other sounds, a soft quote of Qur'anic words from someone in the back, the rustle of a woman with a child saying Subhanallah under her breath. The law would provide options, but the soul asks of a different set of reckonings. The defense did not contest the fall. Instead they sought to place the moment in a larger context: debts pressed upon Kareem, threats at his door, nights spent awake in worry. They spoke of stress and poor choices, of how desperation can erase a man's better self. The lawyer's tone was not to excuse, but to remind the court that human actions are rarely clean-cut. Hamid listened to everything. Each testimony was a stone placed at his feet. He could stack them into anger and throw them back, or pick them up and turn them over to examine what lay beneath. His chest ached with a grief that had no speedometer. It did not know whether to rush to a verdict or to sit and weep. In the quiet of a pocket in his memory, verses he had loved since youth kept rising. The recompense for an evil is an evil like it, but whoever pardons and makes reconciliation, his reward is due from Allah. The words did not argue with the law. They talked to the heart that must decide what form justice would take in this family's hands. A hadith he had taught Ahmad as a boy, that the strong man is he who controls himself when angry, came back like a soft, stubborn echo. Outside the formalities, people pressed their own expectations upon him. A neighbor, a man who'd lost a son long ago, leaned forward and hissed that a city without firm retribution would lose its spine. A younger man argued the opposite: if we break every man who errs, who will mend them? Their voices mingled into the kind of noise a courthouse eats for breakfast. The judge spoke plainly of the options: a criminal finding, the possibility of qisas, the alternative of diya, and the choice that ultimately rested, in part, with the victim's family. He scheduled further hearings, the technical motions and witnesses that would weigh intent against consequence. The gavel came down, not a thunderclap so much as an administrative echo, and the session recessed. As people rose and shuffled out, Hamid stayed seated a long moment. Kareem passed not far from him on the way to the holding area. They were separated by a handful of steps and a lifetime of consequences. For the town, Hamid's face had to mean something: anger, acquiescence, a show of strength. For Hamid himself, the face that mattered was the one reflected in the quiet pool of memory: Ahmed's laugh as he cut bread, his steady voice reciting the Qur'an, the small goodness of a life that had not deserved such an end. When he rose to leave, a weight settled on him that was not the town's weight nor the law's, but a private guillotine of choice. He walked out into the light and did not return home at once. Instead, he made his way to the mosque, not for ceremony, but to sit alone before the words he knew would not answer him but would, perhaps, steady him. The decision had not been made. But something had shifted, the possibility that mercy might be more than resignation. The next hearing would ask of Kareem many things: testimony, remorse, law. It would also ask of Hamid: would he follow the town's hunger for retribution, or step into a mercy that cost him more than words?